you please welcome to the stage Kerry Lambeth!
My beer, this is really distressing. Can you hold this, honey? Thank you. Okay, so I'm interested in Shakespeare and the weird things that people do to places because of Shakespeare, like building fake globes on the Thames bank. And today, yes, we're looking at Verona, which is where Romeo and Juliet is set. Romeo and Juliet, like a lot of Shakespeare, was based on something that existed already. It was a novella that was written by Luigi da Porto, who was an Italian former soldier who decided that he was going to branch off into like faux Renaissance romances. So he wrote this story about the love story between the children of these feuding families, the Montecchis and the Cappellettis, who lived in Verona in the 1300s. Except that actually they didn't. There was no like ever such families in Verona ever. But during the 1700s, when all of the kind of British like literary people were going on the grand tours of Italy, Verona figured out that if they made a tomb and they called it Juliet's tomb, people would go like pay money to see it. So they were like, all right, let's do that. So this is what it looked like in the late 19th century. Byron went there, and you can see that it's a little bit like degraded, and that's because people would just like chip bits off and nick it. So Byron took bits of it and he brought it back for his daughter Ada. Loveless. Correct. Good opinions. By the time that Dickens got there in a year, 1846, there was a guide there who was so like kind of established that he said that I gave her customary fee and she took me to the tomb site. So it was kind of like this stop that you went to when you were in Italy on the tour. So Juliet's house, the Casa de Juliet, someone figured out that there was this house that had a hat on the outside, which hat in Italian is like Capelli, so it was like maybe the house of this family that actually didn't exist in the city, but English people still will pay to see it, so we're going to put it up there. In 1905, this house, which had been privately owned, went up for sale, part of it, and the city was kind of like pressured into buying bits of it. And around 1937, both the house and the tomb were really, really, really done up by especially this guy who's going to be a protagonist of our story, Antonio Avina. So the question that I can hear you all asking is, what happened in 1937 that meant that they poured all of this money into Juliet's house and tomb? Well, two things. Firstly, in 1936, there was a quite big budget Hollywood film. That's Leslie Howard, Ashley Wilkes, and Norma Shearer, who George Cukor directed. So it was like quite a big, like they were just basically like flinging money at this production because it was going to be very prestigious. And they actually sent location scouts to Verona to see either if they wanted to film there or if not, because they eventually decided it was going to be too expensive. To take lots of pictures and to take lots of sketches and kind of notes about what the city was like so that they could recreate it on a studio set. The other thing that was going on in 1937 in Italy, fascism was happening! So when the central government got this request for visas for like this big budget Hollywood film that was like, hey, we're thinking about doing this really important, prestigious thing in Verona, they were like, yes, absolutely. Italy is super important, you're right. And I paid an American like £7 to Photoshop this, and I'm just so delighted. I just want to take a moment. Hold on, now I've got to turn the page. Take a drink. Okay, oh yeah. So the thing about the way that Italian fascists dealt with Italian history is a little bit different than I think the way that we think of fascism as dealing with history. So like in the UK, I think we think of fascists as kind of like purging, as like taking bits that they didn't like and like cutting it out and cleansing people also. But the way that kind of Italian fascism dealt with stories like that was that they just like took it all in and then they like repurposed it to make it kind of fascister. So actually my favorite story about this is that when Italy invaded Ethiopia in 35, they basically, local councils like made up this tradition of jousting against like Saracen opponents who in the 30s were in blackface. So it was basically this like, oh, but we've always had this tradition of like killing black people, so let's all go to Ethiopia. But it was like completely fictitious, and like obviously they were like, jousting existed, and also probably people who would have been described as like Saracens would have possibly participated. But like they weren't always racialized as black. It was just this like, hey, we were really racist in the past, so like let's go be even more racist now. Hey! So, oh God, it's hilarious. So, yes, actually, when MGM got in touch and said, can we have like some visas for these guys who want to come and take pictures of your city, the foreign affairs minister, who in a shocking coincidence was Mussolini's son-in-law, who knew, he wrote a letter to the prefect of Verona, so saying like, look, treat these guys right, and you know, this is a pretty big deal. And after the film premiered in Italy in 37, the museum's director really went on this, like, just plunging money into the sites, and the way that he did it, I just find hilarious. So firstly, for the tomb, which, as you saw, was above ground, he plunked it into the church basement, because in the play, it's in the basement, so it's like, all right, here it goes. These windows, you can see that the frame doesn't really match the rest of it. That's because he grabbed them from this other 16th century house that they then knocked down. And this little like fake rose window, they just like made. So now it's historical. The balcony, they had this house which had like the cap in the wall, but the problem was it didn't have a balcony, which is kind of a big fucking deal if you're doing Romeo and Juliet. So what he did was he was like, well, the thing is I'm renovating this like castle up the road and we've got this spare sarcophagus knocking around. So he just sawed it in half and then like glued it to the wall, and that's now this like big sort of tourist destination, which I just find is so like hilariously like, I wasn't doing anything with it. Like, might as well stick it up there. This is my favorite part. So this is, it's up near the tomb. It's a quote in English from Shakespeare that's been translated into Italian. And they've done the fakey like Renaissance-y, like classical writing thing. It's just the most confused. Like the implication is that like this is the original, and that this Shakespeare guy was so impressed with this Italian thing. And then also around this time, the local newspaper of Verona started printing all of these like crank theories that Shakespeare was actually born in Italy, and he had to like flee for religious persecution reasons. So therefore it was okay to be really excited about Romeo and Juliet because he was Italian, and everybody knows that Italian is great. This is my other favorite, which is the one near Romeo's house, which was literally, they were just like, oh shit, we haven't got something for Romeo. Like, find an old house and put a plaque up near it. And this one, the quote is terrible because it says, this is not Romeo, he's some other where. Because nobody cares about Romeo. Because why would they? Yes, there he is again, he's older. So that was in 37. Some things happened. And Mussolini was deposed in Italy, and then he was rescued by the Germans, who then kind of set him up in this really, really pathetic sort of puppet-like republic. And it was based near Verona, and so Verona was actually bombed quite heavily in the last kind of 18 months of the war because he was based, the Ministry of Culture was based there. Avena, who was the one who was responsible for like knocking all of these things up and then gluing them to things, actually, like he risked his life quite a few times to kind of save like monuments that had been set on fire by allies dropping bombs on them. Now, Casa de Juliet is the 49th best thing to do in Verona, according to TripAdvisor. Wait, hold on, I wrote this down because it was so hilarious. After the Wildlife Fossil Museum and, quote, scavenger hunts. And this, I'm going to leave you with my favorite TripAdvisor review. We went in only because it was free. There's literally nothing in there. Don't waste your money. And I think you could say the same thing about fascism. Thank you.
Kerry Lambeth there, History fans.